Little Marvin, creator and writer of Amazon's Them. Welcome. I'm so happy to talk to you. This has been I've been talking to a lot of people about them, and there's a lot of people who will love it. There's a lot of people who can't make it past episode 5, and you know why. And but I tell people art is that way for a reason, and I'm really interested in getting into that conversation about why you chose this as your art, so that I can then have better ammunition to go back to people and say, this is why you should finish it, because this is why this is there. So thank you for sitting down with me.
It means a ton. Thank you for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. Where did the idea for them as an anthology series and then Covenant generate?
Well, I mean, the anthology piece of it, I've been an anthology kid my entire life. I love the format. I grew
Mhm.
up in the era of like reboots, so I'm not a kid, but it was the first like reboot of the Twilight Zone and reboot of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Like these were the things, and Amazing Stories, Steven Spielberg show. These were the things I was obsessed with as a kid, and I love that they feel like books in a way. It's like chapters, and you get in, you get out. I love the format. So I knew the format was going to be that. Um, as it relates to the story, it really came from my own daily feelings of terror that I was feeling in my own life. This is going back now 4 years. And I was waking up every day and seeing videos of Black folks. It felt like every single day being harassed in some way, either threatened with the police, threatened with the threat of the police, generally surveilled, watched. And it got me thinking a lot about my own journey and my own sort of experience of that terror and of that gaze, but also a history of that gaze that stretches back as far as the country. And so I knew I wanted to shoot through the lens of terror. At the same time, I was thinking a lot about the American dream and where we are as a country. And there's nothing more emblematic to me than the dream of homeownership, which has been anything but a dream for Black folks in this country. In fact, it's been a nightmare. So those two things sort of converged in my brain. It was really kind of peeling back the floorboards of the American dream of homeownership and shooting it through the lens of terror was the beginning of the journey.
Use the phrase lens of terror, and I'm going to admit I'm cheating a little bit here. I know that we have a favorite director in common, which is Alfred Hitchcock.
Hell yeah.
Yeah,
Doesn't
and
everybody have that in common though? Come on.
I don't know. I feel like, I feel like people who revisit Vertigo lately are just like, eh, and I'm just like, I don't
I
speak your
don't want to know.
language.
I don't want to know those people.
There you go. There you go. So, like I said, I had cheated and I read that you had some influences on them that stemmed from De Palma, from Hitchcock, that whole sort of, 60s, 70s thrillers from the masters, heavy directorial hands. Where can audiences go in and look at them and spot references to their stylings or, the content?
I think more like where can't you might be the more apt. I'm not afraid. I'm not trying to hide the references because truly I'm a fanboy, an ultimate
Mhm.
fanboy of all of those directors you just mentioned. Also Kubrick and Peckinpah, and there were so many, Nicholas Roeg. There were so many directors that were in my mind, and so there was no sense of trying to hide it. I actually wanted to wear it on our sleeve. We set out to make a show about the 50s that felt like it was shot in the 60s or 70s. And once we kind of locked into that, it affected everything from the pace and the sort of methodical tone to the soundscape and the music and the framing. I mean, if you've watched the show, I'm a huge fan of a split diopter shot. I'll put them
Yeah.
everywhere if I can. In fact, I tried to, and my DP was like, "They're not cool when you always do it. You may want to pull back." I'm like, "Oh yeah, okay." But yeah, huge fan of all those guys you mentioned. And I think you'll see the references kind of everywhere if you're looking.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's so many major projects over the last couple of years, like Get Out, like Us. Those are just a few that come to mind that explore the Black experience through horror. Why do you think that is? Why do you think who is joining that pantheon? Why do you think that story had to be told through a horror experience?
I mean, if I'm going to get right to the point, not only am I a lifelong horror fanatic,
Mhm.
so there was no other lens really for the show other than that, but also I personally can think of no better genre to explore the terror of being Black in this country, you know, uh, and so for me, it was really never a question. I think that horror has this tremendous ability to take really complex social issues. They always have. If I think of
Right.
Exorcist, one of my favorite films of all time, sure, it's terrifying, it's all the things, but it's also a study of faith. And it's a questioning of faith, people grappling with faith. Is God real? It's interpersonal dynamics between a mother and her daughter. There's all
Mhm.
these deep layers. And then you have the horror infused in that. And then suddenly it catapults it to a whole nother place in the imagination. I think horror has a tremendous ability for wrapping really difficult, thorny issues in kind of a meal that you want to actually consume.
Right.
And so then you don't realize, in a way, it's tricking you. You don't realize you're actually coming out of it going, oh, wait, I learned something here, even as I was scared. So I think the fact that Black folks are using that to tell our stories today seems to me the perfect fit.
I took a horror class in college years ago, clearly, but I will never look at Alien the same way again without thinking about men's fear of pregnancy, men's fear of the female, and the female experience, and how just all the anatomy and everything in Geiger's designs, and how just there's so much that is explored through horror, so it makes sense.
It's so deep. That movie is deceptively, it's so deep.
It is.
Yeah, we could nerd out on that topic forever, but I will pass
Yeah, true. All right.
because otherwise I won't stop.
Steering us back on track.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
obviously, the show starts with the migration of Black Americans from the South in the 50s to other areas of the country to get out of the Jim Crow South. Here, I learned something just like in Watchmen. Of course, I'm ashamed to say I didn't know anything about the Tulsa Massacre. I learned that from watching Watchmen, and I didn't know that Compton was originally a white neighborhood.
Yep.
You always associate with Compton with being more urban, more experience, tightly integrated with the Black experience. Had no idea until I watched the show and then did some research. It's a whole separate side topic about my education and education in America in general. But what other experiences and narratives did you draw from in history to construct the narrative of them?
I mean, listen, well, to talk about the education piece, I mean, we share that wow, I never knew in a way. I'm ashamed to say, actually, that I didn't know some of the things that I was the first benefactor as the creator of the show of the wow, I never knew. I pride myself on knowing a lot about Black history in this country, and particularly about the Southern experience and the Jim Crow experience. But I realized as I was digging in, I knew very little about what Black folks experienced moving to the suburbs and the suburbs of the West and the North, and how at home the tactics that you would see in these suburbs mirrored the tactics you would see in the Jim Crow South. These terror tactics that would have been absolutely at home there were suddenly transported to places like Glendale and Eagle Rock and Pacoima. And this sunny sort of, I think LA sort of prides itself on being this sunny kind of progressive, liberal place, which, as we know, is also not the case today, but definitely not the case then.
Right.
We still remain an incredibly segregated city in many ways. And so, yeah, I was the first benefactor of the wow, I never knew. And that's what got me digging.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, I want to talk a little bit about your actors. You give them this screenplay, you tell them about this series, you get them integrated into the material. How did you help them? What kind of conversations did you have to have with Ashley, with Deborah, to sort of get them warmed up to what was going on in the script?
I mean, I have to say, because they are who they are, there wasn't a lot of warming up
Okay.
that needed to
Yeah.
be done.
Yeah.
They came to party. That's the only way I can think to say it. Like they came 1,000% ready to embody it. It's interesting now, like on the tail end, I'm hearing that they were both rather terrified of the
Mhm.
journey. This is what now I'm hearing it because I'm watching them in interviews, and I'm like, I never could have known that you were terrified because you were so ferociously committed
Mhm.
from day one. I think it was just creating an atmosphere of safety. I said from the day one, this needs to be a safe space for dangerous things to happen. If the place feels dangerous, then it's just bullshit. It can't. Like the place that we're working has to feel so safe that these guys feel absolutely free to go and do their most fearless work. So that was really my job, and then the rest of it is literally all them. I can't take credit for that. Yeah.
Yeah, Deborah was sharing with me the experience that she went through filming what I'll call the cat in the bag sequence in episode 5. And just a chills going down my spine just hearing her talk about going off into a corner and crying for a little bit, then coming back and doing it again, doing it 5 times. That's just and it's so powerful because her performance is so incredible in through the whole thing, but especially in that sequence. It feels almost like a documentary. She is 100% in there.
She absolutely is, and she approached the entire role. I mean, as you know, she occupies almost every frame of this entire
Mhm,
show, and she attacked it almost like an athlete, like
mhm.
it was an endurance test for anyone to have to go through that amount of emotions every single day for the better half of a year. And you never felt like she wasn't anything but 1,000% there. I will say in that particular sequence, I've got to call out Janixa Bravo, our director.
Mhm.
Again, her and I worked to create a safety net for Deborah to feel safe. But I have to say that extended out to the other actors. You know,
Right.
Dale Dickey, who's not a very nice person
Yeah.
in this show, was also we offset crying. You know,
Yeah.
we all were very, very deeply moved. We had an intimacy coordinator. We made sure that, again, everyone felt as safe as we could, but it was an incredibly moving experience for all of us to have. Yeah.
I've had a lot of conversations with people, both who appreciate the show and who checked out after that scene at episode 5 because it
Sure.
was just too much for them to handle.
Sure.
Um, as I've had these conversations, I have defended that and said it's necessary because you have to feel the horror. You have to understand why the post traumatic stress, he has post traumatic stress from the war, she has it from this experience. To understand why they fled and why they stayed where they were. I mean, why they didn't leave that house, why they didn't leave Compton. I mean, there's so many things that kept them there. But why would you say that sequence is so key and critical to the success of the overall season?
Wow. Well, that's a good question. I don't know how to extricate that sequence from what the show is.
Mhm.
And it came that scene in particular sprung from a very I think like all horror creators or writers, we've got, we're grappling with our own id, and our
Mhm.
own nightmares. And this one was sprung, that sequence in particular was sprung of a nightmare. And it was a nightmare that I had. Usually I'll wake up from a dream and I'll try to like write something really quick into my phone just so I don't forget it and go back to
Right.
sleep. And I wake up the next day and I write the scene. With that one, everything in my body rejected it. I threw the phone. I was like, "You're not going to contemplate that," and go back to bed. That was how I. And then I woke up the next day, and then I would say for like the next 48 hours, I was haunted in a
Mhm.
way that like it was visceral. Like I just can't explain it any other way. And as an artist, I feel like it's our duty to explore those things that terrify us the most, particularly with horror, as long as it feels authentically grounded in the truth of what you're making.
Right.
And I could check that box. I wanted a scene that not only explained exactly what you beautifully said, what this family has dealt with, but also in a way touches the brutality and the randomness of violence and the abominable nature of the Jim Crow institution.
Mhm.
And it needed to touch that in a way that we hadn't seen. Because if I had given it to you in a package that you'd seen before, you could be like, okay, well, that's safe. There's a remove. I've seen that before. I've seen acts of like police brutality, or I've seen a slave narrative. I've seen these things before. I get that. But you've never seen this.
Right.
And because of that, I think it works in a way, in a subconscious kind of way. But again, it wasn't planned.
Right.
It sprung from a nightmare and it stayed.
Wow.
You know.
So this series comes at the on the heels of last year's Black Lives Matter movement, the George Floyd, the Breonna Taylor, all these horrible things that are happening to Black Americans across the country. Um, why do you think them right now at this moment in time is as successful as it is?
I mean, I think it speak. Here's the sad truth about this is we could have released this any year for the
Right.
last 100 years,
Yeah.
and it would have been relevant. That's the sad facts. You know, I think that perhaps we're just finding language for a kind of
Hmm.
I don't know. I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for anybody else.
Sure.
The last summer, it it unlocked something within me that was quite different. I think that it was almost like a tipping point within my own spirit
Hmm.
where I was so exhausted. I am so exhausted with the fear of the police. I am so exhausted with this kind of treatment that it's almost like a point of no return.
Hmm.
And I feel like maybe collectively, I don't want to get ahead of my skis, but it feels almost collectively like we were all at that point of no return together as a globe.
Right.
My hope is that we keep that same energy because we're so far from where we need to be. I don't know. I think probably could have done well anytime, sadly, but I think, I'm glad we're telling this story now.
Right.
I will say that.
Yeah, I mean, you can point to films and television that come throughout history and on the tail of political movements, presidents, even, and right now we've got them. You've got HBO's Lovecraft Country, just with that black anger and that rage, and here's what we have been experiencing, and you don't know anything about that. It just I think that's why it's so difficult for people to understand is because every frame of this art just permeates with that fear and that terror and the horror of the black experience, what it is today.
Um, Thank you. And I would also say you used a word that I think is quite apt, which is rage.
Hmm.
I mean, there is a little nugget of rage at the heart of this show, and we
Hmm.
made no bones about trying to hide it.
Right.
I wasn't particularly interested. I would say Lena would agree on this, and we all held hands, even with the studio, on creating something that was not going to be afraid of embracing um, the rage and the grief and the pain at the heart of the story. Um, I don't know. I don't feel like the point of art is to sugarcoat or to lull you into any sense of complacency. The best art I know, especially in horror, has rattled my cage. I
Right.
think again, I go back to The Exorcist. That is not an easy experience, right?
No.
All right. The
Right.
last hour is not easy. It's not a cakewalk. It's because of that it stays with me forever.
Mhm.
And so I don't know. I think that's the point of what we do,
Yeah.
really.
Great horror, great art challenges. That is what this does. Um, One thing that I was really interested in was you have a very diverse writing and directing staff. Tell me about what that offers, the overall experience, the different perspectives that it brings.
I mean, as a writer's room, we were pretty much, I think, evenly split
Hmm.
between black folks and white folks, and I think we needed that.
Hmm.
We needed to have that kind of, it's not one side story. And by the way, it's not. I never think of these things when somebody says, "Oh, that's a black show." I'm like, I don't know what you mean by that. I see a
Right.
show that centers black people,
Right.
but I don't know what you mean by black show because we certainly don't call everything else we're watching white shows.
Right.
So to me, it's about was creating a space again, another safe space with black folks and white folks together to hash out the things that we were afraid to say. And that went for both sides. Like we were going to create a very open space for people to say the things that they had been grappling with, that they were afraid to grapple with, and I think that created a base level of um, trust,
Mhm.
um, to then to go forth and do work that we could, yeah. that was fearless, or at least we tried to be anyway.
Absolutely. So, my last question is for you. This is an anthology series. Do you have ideas about what you would like to explore with the second season?
Um, I don't know if I can answer. Amazon would like to say yes, absolutely. I'm going to say the Amazon. Yes, of course I do. I have all the seasons figured out. No,
Okay.
I definitely do. I do, and I'm very excited to explore more and to dig in. Um, yeah.
Are you going to sleep at night hoping that you have a terrible nightmare that you can then jump up and write a brilliant scene again?
No, man.
No,
Like,
yeah, no.
no, I mean, not really. I think no, no, no. But I do feel a tremendous amount of gratitude for the experience of, I mean, again, I think our job as writers and creators is just to sort of disappear
Mm,
and to allow, whatever it is to work through us. And we set out to make a show as twisted and as dark and as sad and as all the things as our show no doubt is. We set out to make a love letter to those families who had endured a great amount of terror to stake their rightful claim in the American dream. And that's just an honor. It's a privilege to actually get to do that. So my focus is really just to stay in the gratitude and
yeah,
like let that lead. Yeah.
excellent. Well, little Marvin, thank you so much for
Thanks.
the show. Thank you for this conversation. This has been a fantastic conversation. So I really appreciate it. I love the show. Can't wait to revisit it. As sick as that sounds, but
It does, but I'll
you
give you a
know,
pass.
yeah,
I
there we
do.
go.
It's a mixed bag. I do like that you're watching it repeatedly, though. I will say
Yeah,
that.
maybe not every scene, but there are some sequences that I want to revisit just because I'm fascinated by the direction of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.
You too. Bye.